Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the committee's 24th meeting in 2019. Could I ask all people present, please, to ensure their mobile phones are on silent. Agenda item 1 is subordinate legislation, and this item is to consider one negative instrument as detailed in the agenda. No motions to annul or representations have been received in relation to the instrument. Is the committee agreed that it does not wish to make any recommendation to the instrument, or does anyone have a comment? Deputy Convener, Maureen.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Is it kind of public knowledge how many of these oaks were imported, where they're planted, or the location?
I don't think that it is public knowledge, but it would be a point that we could write to the government on and ask for further information if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
The committee feel that's a good idea. Okay, if we write to the government, but on the basis of the instrument, does anyone have any recommendations, or are we agreed that we do not wish to make any recommendations? We're agreed we don't want to. Thank you, and we will write to the government. Agenda item 2 is subordinate legislation, the additional powers request, Scotland Regulations 2019 draft. This item is to consider one affirmative instrument in the additional powers request, Regulations 2019. The committee will take evidence from Paul Wheelhouse, the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands. The motion seeking the approval of the affirmative instrument will be considered at item 3. Members should note, please, that there have been no representations to the committee on this instrument. I'd like to welcome from the government Paul Wheelhouse, the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, Jessica McPherson, the Head of Local Government Policy and Relationships, and Stuart Johnson, Local Government Policy Officer for the Scottish Government. Minister, would you like to make an opening statement?
I can very briefly, Convener. I just to put something on the record, if it would be helpful, just for members' benefit, just to say that this regulation this morning, and good morning, I should say, everyone, Convener and colleagues. The laying of the additional powers request, Scotland Regulations 2019, is the next step in implementation of the Islands Scotland Act 2018, and as you may know, the Scottish Government has been working collaboratively with the 6 relevant local authorities to progress both the regulations and the non-statutory guidance that will accompany them. And the regulations will come into force in mid-November if passed by Committee and Parliament at the latest, and subject to approval, as I say, being obtained by Parliament. It will be for the local authorities themselves to decide, in consultation with their own local communities, of course, and relevant stakeholders, what additional powers they might seek to request from government. And some areas that have been suggested in the engagement with local authorities are areas around economic development, digital connectivity, fuel poverty, health and housing. But it also sits alongside existing measures under the Local Governance Review, as you may know, which are being taken forward by certainly Orkney Islands Council and potentially others. I hope that was helpful, Convener, but I'll keep it brief.
Okay. So do any members of the committee wish to ask any questions on it? No, there doesn't appear to be any questions, so your statement has obviously convinced committee members, and we'll therefore move on to agenda item 3, which is subordinate legislation, the additional powers request. The third item on the agenda is the formal consideration of motion S5M 18217 in the name of the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, calling on the committee to recommend that the additional powers request regulations 2019 draft be approved. Can I ask you, Minister, to move that motion, please?
Formally moved, Convener.
Minister, do you have any further comments you wish to make?
I'm happy to rest on my opening remarks. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Minister. The question, therefore, is that motion S5M 18217 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes our consideration of agenda item 3. I'm briefly going to suspend the meeting now to allow a changeover of witness. Thank you for attending. Thank you. I'd like to reconvene the meeting and move on to agenda item 4, which is a transport update. Today we'll take evidence from the Scottish Government on various transport issues. Can I welcome the panel? Michael Matheson, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity. Paul Wheelhouse, the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands. Michelle Rennie, the Director of Major Projects. Heather Cowan, the Head of Strategy and Integration. Bill Reevy, the Director of Rail, and Chris Wilcott, the Director of Aviation, Maritime, Freight and Canals. Now, I am told that neither the Cabinet Secretary or the Minister would like to make an opening statement, so that means we can go straight on to the questions from the members. And the first question is coming from the Deputy Convener, Maureen Watt. Maureen.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. I'd like to start asking questions about Ferguson Marine, which of course there is a lot of public interest. Clearly this is quite a concerning situation, and I wondered if there has been any interest from any credible private sector operators to run Ferguson or take over Ferguson Marine.
Paul.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose the first thing to say is that the Scottish Government isn't directly involved in the sale of the business itself. As you may know, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has established a programme board to oversee the management of the yard while the administrators are undertaking a market testing exercise. The Deloitte, the administrators, are undertaking it as we speak, and it's being conducted over a 4 to 6 week period. It's important, we believe, to maintain the integrity of the marketing process, so it would not be appropriate for us to comment at this point in time or indeed to discuss any details of commercial information relating to the business or sale at this point, but clearly the government would be supportive if there was a commercially viable offer put in. However, we are obviously preparing for a scenario where perhaps no such offer is received by the administrators, and preparing for potential solutions that would involve the Scottish Government taking over the management of the yard. So apologies that I can't state at this point in time what interest there has been, because that is not a process that we're directly involved in managing. But clearly we have a strong interest in it, and it will conclude relatively quickly.
So my understanding is there has been someone put in to do something. Are they preparing it for returning to the private sector, or are they there to make sure that the ferries are built? My understanding is that this person has not necessarily got a marine background, so are there experts coming in to get these ferries fixed? Because my reading of the situation is that there hasn't really been the correct personnel involved, or personnel have come and gone in relation to getting these ferries built.
It's certainly Tim Hare, who's been appointed as the turnaround director by Mr Mackay. His focus will be on stabilising the business. That is his background. He is correct to say that's it's not his specialism in terms of marine area, but he does have experience which is relevant, and his focus will be on stabilising the business, calculating the financial position, and putting in place a programme to complete ATO1 and ATO2, so that's the Glen Sannox and vessel ATO2, in the shortest time possible, and including costs and timescales, while it's ensuring value for money for the taxpayer. And Mr Mackay has set a target for the end of October to bring forward a fully costed delivery plan for both vessels with an accurate timescale. It's one of the concerns we've had throughout the process is that we were being given successively revised estimates for when ATO1 and ATO2 would be delivered, but they proved to be kind of shifting sands. And we want to give enough time for Tim Hare and the programme board, which I should state includes representatives from Transport Scotland, Marine Scotland, David McBrain Limited, Scottish Enterprise, CMAL, as well as representatives from the on-site workforce. So there is expertise in that programme board with detailed knowledge of how to build ferries and how to manage that process, and we aim to have a well-developed delivery plan brought to us by the end of October, so that we know how sort of realistic timescales for delivery and costing, so that we can obviously update colleagues in Parliament and indeed the stakeholders that are depending on those vessels coming into service.
Just before I go back to the Deputy Convener for another question, I'd just like to make it clear that having said that that's your timescale, I believe the committee would look to having you back into the committee as soon as that information is available to bring them up to date. And it would be nice to have an undertaking you'll do that.
Absolutely. I think the Finance Secretary has also made clear he is happy to engage with Parliament in whatever form Parliament wishes to take forward. We have a duty to try and, where we can, provide clarity, particularly for the stakeholders. As I say, we're very aware that communities that are waiting for these vessels to come into service are very keen to know the detail of when that will happen. And of course, CalMac themselves need to know when these vessels will be available. So absolutely happy personally to engage with the committee as best I can to give you as much information as I can. But clearly we're at a time in the process where we're still waiting for the outcome of that market testing exercise. First and foremost, establish, is there a commercially viable bid from a third party? And if not, then obviously the measures that the Finance Secretary has set out would then kick in terms of the government taking forward a management of the yard.
Thank you, Minister. Sorry to interrupt, Maureen.
Okay, thank you. We'll come on to Prestwick Airport later, but I wonder if there's any crossover or lessons to be learned. I mean, Prestwick has possibly been in the government's hands longer than they might have wanted to. So are there any lessons to be learned between the two?
I would invite the Cabinet Secretary to comment on Prestwick. It was not my area of specialism, but certainly, clearly we are trying to learn lessons from what's happened here. I think Mr Mackay has also made clear, as is the First Minister, that our desire to have clarity about the pipeline of investment in ferries as well, which will obviously help the wider shipbuilding sector in Scotland, not just Ferguson's, but Ferguson's are a very important part of that infrastructure. But clearly we are trying to learn how we can best support these businesses to remain commercially viable and not have to require government to step in and intervene, as we've had to do in this situation potentially. But maybe pass over to my colleague, Mr Matheson, to refer to Prestwick.
Can we deal with Prestwick
Slightly
later on, because there are more questions on that?
Okay.
If we can stay on ferries. And I think the next question is from Angus. Angus.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Good morning, everyone. As Maureen Watts mentioned previously, there's a lot of public interest in the whole issue, not least the increased costs for the two ferries. So what funds have you set aside to cover the increased cost of the two new hybrid ferries, and which budget have these funds been taken from, and also what impact that might have on other transport priorities?
Well, clearly, Convener, and good morning, Mr MacDonald. Clearly, Convener, we are trying to get to the point where we have detailed costing, so it's difficult to say exactly what will be required to complete the vessels at this stage. As you may be aware, there was a contract for £97 million that Ferguson's won in a fair and square and a competitive tendering exercise. But we are committed, as the Finance Secretary has said and First Minister have said, to repeat the point that these vessels need to be delivered. And as I've set out in my earlier response to Maureen Watt, that we are seeking to try and do that at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayer. We will learn a lot. Obviously, 801 is not complete yet, but there's been a lot of work done in the completion of the vessel to date, that we would try and minimise the need to change anything in 802. So we're trying to learn from what's happened in 801 into 802, but we have to rely on Tim Hare and his team and the programme board to have the chance to come forward with a detailed delivery plan for the vessels and the costings for those vessels. And we should, as I said earlier on, have that by the end of October, and I'm more than happy to participate in any engagement thereafter once we have that with Mr Mackay or my own to deal with any questions the committee may have at that point. But it's hard to be precise, so I wouldn't want to put a figure on it at this moment. I apologise to Mr MacDonald for saying that. But clearly we're trying to deliver the vessels as quickly and as cost efficiently as we can, and that's the objective the programme board have been set.
Okay, with regard to impact on other transport authorities, transport priorities, specifically, what impact might the nationalisation of Ferguson Marine have on the High Seas 3 project to develop a hydrogen-powered ferry for use on routes in the Orkneys?
Well, we certainly, as I say, the initial comments we've made around the the yard and the work that the programme board are doing is essential that 801 and 802 are delivered, but we are conscious that there's also contracts, not just for High Seas 3, but also the work in terms of barge for Kazakhstan market, in terms of and also fishing vessels that have been commissioned through Ferguson. So we're very much aware, as I'm sure the administrators are looking very closely at, how to ensure that those contracts are fulfilled. It's in everyone's interest that Ferguson's have the ability to come through this difficult period with the delivery of projects they have secured to help sort of ensure that their commercial reputation is protected, and that they have a strong track record in which to spring forward. So clearly High Seas 3 is a very, very interesting project. We engage with Orkney Islands Council and other partners on that, and we've been participating in development of infrastructure around storage of hydrogen in Orkney through the Big Hit and surf and turf projects. So we've got skin in the game, if you like, in terms of trying to see hydrogen being used as a potential fuel for ferries. So from a ferries perspective, I'm keen to see that project concluded, but we obviously have to wait to see the outcome of the market testing exercise. And then obviously if the government are directly involved in managing the yard, how best we can ensure that other projects are completed.
Okay, thanks. It's certainly encouraging to hear that the order book is fairly healthy. But the Minister may or may not have noticed last week that the Norwegian Prime Minister launched an electric hybrid ferry in Norway for Color Line, and I'm just curious as to whether there's any ongoing work with regard to solely hybrid electric ferries being commissioned in the future?
It's certainly, Convener, in response to the climate emergency, as you may know, we're going to be developing, once potentially the climate change bill proceeds through Parliament, assuming it passes stage 3, then the climate change plan that's led by Rosanna Cunningham will be upgraded, and that will have an examination of all policy areas across the economy. Transport is obviously one of the areas we're very conscious that there are calls for more investment in low-carbon technology there, and we have obviously in parallel developing the ferries plan and the vessel replacement and deployment plan, which will feed into and draw from the National Transport Strategy and the Strategic Transport Project Review exercises as well. So there's a lot of work going on in parallel looking at how we decarbonise our transport systems, and clearly we want to try and help decarbonise the ferry fleet. So I'm very interested, as are my colleagues in the Ferries Unit, in looking at examples where alternative fuels and propulsion systems have been developed. Clearly we have got, in the case of 801 and 802, two LNG hybrid ferries, but we've also got High Seas 3, as you've referenced earlier on, and we are interested in battery technology as well, to sort of find out what solutions will work in our market, where we have obviously some unique conditions, as you know the Western Isles very well, and in the Hebrides, that there are some particular characteristics of those routes to make sure that vessels that have that technological option available for them can operate in the kind of environments in which they'd be expected to operate. But certainly modern vessels are clearly the way to go, and we'll be taking strong interest in that.
Thank you.
We're going to stick on finance just at the moment regarding this, and I think Stuart's got a question, and then I have a question. Stuart.
Just to be clear, it's a very quick question which you may have to answer later. One of the things on things like ferries is buying in propulsion units because they're not built by Ferguson's. Are we confident that there are rock-solid contracts to ensure the delivery of propulsion units to a schedule that will suit?
I need to come back to this. I might ask, if I may, Chris Wilcock, just to confirm this, but I believe the propulsion systems are already purchased for 801 and 802, so I don't think that is an issue. One of the things we have looked at is obviously, because if there's a change in ownership, we'll have to just, and I'm sure the programme boards will be looking at, is just the continuity of any guarantees and insurances over those engines in these situations, as may occur in any such transfer of ownership. But the propulsion systems are there, I believe. I think Mr. Wilcock is confirming that.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a question. Takes me back to when I used to manage projects. Is that what used to happen? Is you got to certain key points in the project, you'd be allowed to draw down money to pay off the people who've been carrying out the work. So therefore, I'm assuming it's exactly the same on this project, which sort of corresponds with the evidence that I've heard that £45 million has been drawn down by Ferguson Marine against the two ferries, which was a £97 million contract. So presumably, and you've always made the point, Minister, that it's a fixed price contract that's only going to cost £52 million more, because you wouldn't have paid surely the £45 million if you didn't know that £45 million worth of work had been completed. Could you just shed some light on that?
Forgive me, I don't have the precise timescales and figures in front of me, but we have been trying to, I know that CMAL have tried to be as helpful as possible to ensure the continuity of employment at Ferguson's when there were liquidity issues.
That's not the question, Minister. The question is, the government has allowed £45 million to be drawn down against a contract of £97 million. So they must have been sure, when they allowed that £45 million to be drawn down, that £45 million of work had been completed. Otherwise, somebody, I would say, has acted wrongly. I'm asking you, are you confident that on 801 and 802, £45 million worth of work has been completed and only £52 million is still to be paid?
It's difficult to cost the value of the work that's been completed in
well,
801.
how then can you allow somebody to draw down £45 million?
If I may be allowed to actually answer the question, I would be grateful.
Yeah, sorry, I'll ignore that. Just carry on with the answer, Mr. Wheelhouse.
What's difficult? Obviously, we've got the programme board, which we're looking at their assessment of how much work has been completed. And I appreciate the question. I'll try and come to that, but try to assess exactly how much work has been completed in 801 and 802. So we'll get an assessment, obviously, in the part of the exercise that the programme board will be doing to report back to Mr Mackay by the end of October, is to actually look at the costed kind of work that's been done to date, what needs to still be done, and where we're at on that. I understand the point around the contractual point that you're making about degree to which payments may or may not have been paid too early. But we can come back on the precise timing of that, if that would be helpful to the committee. But I know that there have been strenuous efforts made by CMAL to try and support the continuity of employment at Ferguson's when there were severe liquidity issues. So I know that's not precise answer that you're looking for, convener, and I apologise for that. But I don't have a precise schedule against which I could give you an estimate at this point in time, but I hope that we'll be able to furnish the committee with that information.
What would perhaps be helpful to answer the question is evidence that a QS, qualified surveyor, and a quantity surveyor has signed off £45 million worth of work to allow that money to be drawn down against the contract. And perhaps you could let us see sight of those.
It may be helpful. I'm not sure if Mr Wilcock, who's more familiar with the finances on the project at this stage, might be able to give any further information, but I will note the point that you've made, convener, and we'll try and come back to that. But if Mr Wilcock wants to comment.
Yeah, so probably helpful to separate out into two things. So the £45 million figure that you're referring to, I'm assuming, is the Scottish Government's two loans that were made to the business. So they were made as a combination of working capital and as well as an allowance to diversify the business. So those, whilst those have been drawn down, those have been used to fund the vessels in part. There's also, though, in terms of the £97 million of the overall fixed price contract, there are staged payments and certain milestones that the vessels have to meet. I don't have them in front of me, but it's things like on launch, on laying of steel, various design stages. So what I can say is the payments that have been paid out on the £97 million figure have been paid out in line with the agreed stage payments as agreed in the contract.
Okay, I'm not quite sure that answers the question, but I take that's as far as I'm going to get. Jamie, I think yours is the next question.
Thank you. Sorry, can I just clarify something then to either the Minister or Mr Wilcock? So what you're saying is that there was a design and build fixed price for the contract of 97, of which it would be paid in instalments as progress was made, and there would be a process for signing off the release of funds from the fixed price contract, and that was through the client being CMAL. But you're saying that in addition, the Scottish Government made additional loan funding available to the Yard of £45 million, of which some or indeed potentially all of which may be used to complete the ferries, and that money would be drawn down as key milestones were also reached on the build of the ferries. Is that the case?
So those monies weren't necessarily tied to key milestones, but we had those drawdowns verified by an independent assessor, a consultant that was in the yard, as well as PwC, who analysed all of those payments in relation to the loan drawdown. I'd stress that's not my exact area of expertise.
No, I appreciate that, but what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is that if the defence line from the Scottish Government at the moment is 97 was the price for the ferries, and any dispute over cost overruns, and there clearly was a dispute over overruns between the client and the yard, but you're already admitting that there were overruns because an additional £45 million was made available over and top of the fixed price contract. So what I'm saying is you're already admitting to a liability of around £145 million in addition to any subsequent overruns. So Derek Mackay stated, and I asked him specifically in the chamber numerous times what that £45 million loan funding was for, and I was told categorically that not a penny of it would be used on Hulls 801 and 802. Are you now saying the opposite?
Chris, sorry, I'm going to. The Minister wants to come in, so I'm going to stop you on that.
Thank you.
I'm bringing the Minister.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not agreeing with the premise of the point that Mr. Reid's making. I understand why he's making it, but I can explain the additional £30 million loan facility, for example, was to help the firm diversify as well as providing the firm with working capital. As we've mentioned, I think in response to the earlier point that Mr MacDonald made, there are other contracts that the business is taking forward. They've also invested in the facilities, as I know you, an Inverclyde man, you'll know that, see the evidence in your own eyes that there's been investment in facilities at Ferguson's as well. So there's funding of £30 million has been provided to Ferguson's. It was to enhance the yard's capabilities and sustainability and to try and help broaden the business base.
I do get all that, but that's not my question. My question is, if of that £45 million additional funding that was given to the yard directly by the Scottish Government, not from CMAL, if any of that money was used towards the build of Hulls 801 and 802, then surely that's already an admission of liability of overruns on top of the 97. Otherwise, none of that money could have been used for the build of 801 or 802.
I want to avoid any confusion as that it's a fixed price contract, so the yard was given a contract for a fixed price. There has been working capital as part of the 30 million, and the previous 15 million loans are available to help diversify the business, provide working capital. Now that's up to the business themselves as to how they then use that funding, obviously in line with the principles of why it was lent to them. Okay. That's not the same as assuming all that money went into the cost of 801 and 802. So I think,
but we know that it did.
With a great respect, I've just explained there's been investment in the facilities. They're doing work for barges in Kazakhstan, fishing vessels, High Seas 3, as we've talked about, doing design work on that, and trying to win work in the defence sector. So they have been using funds for a number of different purposes. This is to provide liquidity to the business and to ensure it can invest and diversify the business. That is not the same, and I want to make that point categorically, it's not the same as that funding going directly into 801 and 802.
Okay, I'm happy to leave that there, but we do know, Minister, that there is a direct correlation between the drawdown of that money from the yard, which was held, I presume, in escrow or in Scottish Government's accounts. There was a direct process linking progress on the ships to the drawing down of the cash from the 45. So there absolutely was a process of money being released on the premise of somebody signing off work being done on the hulls. That's the point I'm making. So what you're saying to me is that money was just made available to do whatever they wanted with, and if they wanted to spend it on the Calmac ferries, that was up to them.
Well, as Mr Green and other members may know, when the Scottish Government or agencies lend money to businesses, there's on the basis of, under state aids regulations, we have to do it on a commercial basis. That's basis of proposals that are brought forward by the business. So it's not, I wouldn't want to imply it's a complete laissez-faire that they have can spend money on things which were irrelevant to the purpose that they originally drew down the money. But it's done on a commercial basis, and the loans, as I say, were given to the business to facilitate the investment in the business and to ensure its ongoing stability and sustainability. And I would hope that's something that members would recognise as being of value. Clearly, it's providing working capital because of the business can then use that funding to maintain cash flow while they're employing staff and make sure they are paid their wages. But they have also been investing to try and diversify the business. And without commenting on the commercial merits of the areas they've moved into, that's clearly an effort that CBC as the owners and the management team have been trying to broaden the base of the business and try and win private sector contracts as well.
So on that on winning, let's talk about the future of the yard. I think that's what's key here. You'll be aware of a dossier of information that Jim McCall, the previous owner of the yard, before it went into administration, circulated amongst politicians and indeed much of the media. It's quite a short document. I have it here in front of me, but it's quite damning, I'd say, Minister, to say the least. I appreciate there's a public dispute between the former owners of the yard and CMAL and the Scottish Government on this specific issue. But Mr McCall seems to find wider issue with the plans of the Scottish Government. Can I quote from his document that was sent to me? It says that my fear now is with the prospect of the Scottish Government nationalising the shipyard on the horizon, FMEL will be unable to fully exploit the diverse range of opportunities, which will be a hugely missed opportunity for the revival of the Scottish shipbuilding industry. And in addition to that document, he sent a list of potential orders that they have, totalling some many billions of pounds worth of business. What exploration has the government done on the effects that nationalisation of the yard, if that were to occur, would have on the yard's ability to fully exploit these commercial opportunities, to participate in tenders and consortia, and indeed win some of this business if it was a publicly owned yard?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is clearly we're entirely supportive of businesses in Scotland winning work for their employees to undertake in Scotland. So I would hope that would be taken as given. I want to say in regard to the process we've gone through, and I'm not going to comment on specifics that Mr McCall may have brought to the committee.
Do you agree with them or not?
I have a different interpretation of events than Mr McCall, but I think I'm assuming there will be a process by which Parliament will wish to explore these matters. But what I would say is that the government has gone to great lengths and works very strenuously with CBC as the owners of the business prior to administrators being appointed, and indeed with professionals to try and explore any commercial opportunities to try and support the business to avoid the situation we have now entered. So Mr Mackay, as the Finance Secretary, and the entire government, an extensive team of civil servants have worked very hard to try and avoid the situation we arrived at and to ensure that the business had a viable future. And as it turned out, proposals that were brought forward by CBC were deemed that, for various reasons, including that there were potentially risks associated with those options, that they couldn't be taken forward. And I regret that, but we are in a position where administrators have been appointed. Deloitte are now trying to do market testing for the yard. I believe that shipbuilding in Scotland has a bright future. We have, as I'm sure the committee will be well aware, discussed on many occasions in the Chamber the need for investment in the ferry fleet, not just in the directly controlled ferries in Calmac and the Northern Isles routes, but also in internal ferries in Orkney and Shetland, where there are investment needs there, that there is a pipeline of work potentially for yards such as Ferguson's to compete for the billions of value that Mr McCall refers to. Are potential contracts, not one contract. I think we need to bear that in mind. But clearly we'll be very supportive, as we've tried to be in terms of the loan finance we've already discussed this morning, in supporting the business to try and diversify. So I hope it would be clear that we are supportive of their efforts. Unfortunately, the business has ended in a situation where we've now entered administration, and clearly we're supporting the administrators and trying to secure a bright future for the yard.
Jamie, I'm sorry. I think you've had a fair crack, and I need to bring some other people in. And just remind everyone that obviously short questions lead to short answers, and then everyone can get in. The next person on the list is Mr Lyle. Richard.
I'm sure I'll get the same time as Mr Green. I don't have the same problems as Mr Green has. It's quite common sense. If we hadn't done what we'd done, you know, the shipyard would have been away. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And basically the £45 million is a liquidity. You might have went and bought a crane to build another ship, or to, you know, it's simple. It's no rocket science, with the greatest respect to Mr Green. And some people are trying to show, he's lucky, he got sent that dossier. I didn't. I wonder why. I wonder why. because at the end of the day, you know, I want to know the truth, as everyone, but I have to say the Scottish Government has done everything, to my mind, by the book. And I don't come from Inverclyde, and I don't have ferries in the middle of Uddingston and Belsill. I have a lock. But anyway, I'm going to group my questions in order to get back to where the convener wants us to be. I'm going to group the questions. So, what impact has the delay in the delivery of the 2 ferries, including the likelihood...
That's the next group. We were still on the question. I'm going to come to you with that. There's still people who want to come in.
Oh, OK.
On the
Well,
back of
I've
that.
made my comment against the point that Mr Green has
So,
made.
OK.
I'll wait on my questions then.
Thank you for your
Thank
statement.
you, Convener.
Peter, I think you've got a question you want to ask.
Yeah, I completely disagree with Richard there. This is not simple. This is a shambles. This is very serious for the future of shipbuilding in Scotland. We've got 2 ferries 2 years late already. The prospect that are going to be double the original cost. And part of that, the reason that they're going to be double the original cost is because CMAL made numerous changes to the contract, numerous changes to the build, and communications broke down between CMAL and Ferguson Marine. Ferguson Marine tried desperately to get some kind of mediation in place. Why didn't the government facilitate mediation between CMAL and Fergus Marine to sort out the numerous changes to the plans?
If I can say to Mr Chapman, I'm not surprised at his disagreement on this issue, because it's obviously a major story and there seems to be political dividing lines on it. But what I would say is that FMLEL's request, we convened a series of meetings between the parties to seek a resolution. So it's not true to say that the Scottish Government or our agencies did not try and bring about a resolution to the dispute between the 2 contracting parties. And indeed, an independent view of the merits of the claims submitted by Ferguson's Marine was carried out for the Scottish Government. We advised the interested parties in confidence of the outcome of that exercise, but it would not be appropriate to share the opinion further. However, it did not offer any legal basis for the Scottish Government or CMAL to pay Ferguson Marine more than the fixed price contract. So I'll leave it to members to conclude from that what they will. But we have looked extensively at that, and indeed there were mechanisms within the contract for disputes about design to be resolved. And if I may, if there's time permits, can we bring Mr Wilcock in that, because I know he has looked closely at the mechanisms. But there were specific measures in the contract to allow design issues to be exchanged between the parties and timescales for that to be resolved between the parties to allow design to move on. So I think some of the media focus on this issue is misplaced, but if I can maybe bring Mr Wilcock in, with your permission.
Can I just follow up on that? There may have been mechanisms, you say there were mechanisms, but these mechanisms failed to resolve the issues. As I understand it, there was a complete breakdown between CMAL and Ferguson Marine on this very issue. So why was that allowed to happen if there are mechanisms in place? They certainly clearly didn't work.
May, sure. And then, because I would like to hear from Chris what the mechanisms were, sure, so we understand them.
OK, that would be helpful. Just in brief, I'll just repeat the point, if I may, just that we have had the independent review of the contract based on the claim that was put forward by Ferguson's, and that exercise, as I say, didn't offer any legal basis for the Scottish Government or CMAL as our agency to pay Ferguson's more than the fixed price contract. So I would have to trust the member to read into that what he will, but that exercise was done independently by a professional and came to the conclusion that we had no legal basis to offer payment to Ferguson's. So you can draw from that we will, but I've asked Mr Wilcock.
Resolution.
So in terms of the change mechanism, that does exist within the contract. Again, I'm not an expert in that area. There is an opportunity for one party to request changes and the other party within a set time frame to come back on that. I can't comment on all the various other allegations that have been made around this, but there were a series of changes that were made and agreed through that mechanism that CMAL has agreed with FML on that, without going into commercial detail of it. So that mechanism does exist and has been used.
OK, I'm going to bring in briefly Mike Rumbles and then John Finney.
As I understand this is a dispute between CMAL and Ferguson's about the contract, and the Minister has just said, quite rightly, that you facilitated an independent review of this dispute. One side says this, the other side says that. Both sides are aware of this independent review and the results of this independent review. The government is aware of the independent review. This committee isn't. And this is our job to try and find out, drill down to what's actually happened. And you've just said, trust us to read into this what you will. Well, sorry, Minister, I don't believe that's good enough. I think this job of this committee is to try and get to the bottom of what's actually happened. And it would be extremely helpful if you could, in writing later on, inform the committee what actually happened with this independent advice. If it is independent, we'd like to know what it was all about. So we need to know what happened here.
I'll certainly take that point, Mr Rumbles, and we'll discuss that with colleagues and see what we can say further on the matter. But hope, remember, I'm not trying to be difficult. It's just because of convention around discussing advice of the nature that I'm referring to, and how that is revealed under ministerial code. I will need to take some advice about what we can and can't say. But I would also just add, I think, because it is relevant, I think, Convener, that at any point Ferguson's were free to pursue their claims in the courts if they felt they had a strong enough case.
Okay. John, you wanted to come in on that.
Yes, I'll just be very brief. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I think, Minister, it would be wrong to suggest that my constituents are disinterested in some of the areas that have been questioned here. I did hear Mr Mackay say he would make himself available, and I've heard you say the same. This is a question and answer rather than an inquiry, and I think there possibly will be a parliamentary inquiry into this, in which my constituents will be very interested in the outcome too. But primarily, absolutely, first and foremost, they want these ferries. They're already late, they're delayed. Can I get an assurance from you that, notwithstanding the willingness of the Scottish Government to cooperate with whichever committee on these inquiries, that the primary focus will be in delivering replacement, much needed replacement vessels for the Western Isles, please?
Absolutely. I want to acknowledge the point that Mr Finney has made. It's obviously been a major concern for myself throughout the process that we've gone through as the Minister responsible for the delivery of services under the supported ferry contracts, that we have those vessels, so we have the extra capacity, the headroom that we have discussed in the Chamber, which is so needed to help us have more flexibility and resilience. So I want to give Mr Finney absolute assurance that the Government has effectively two priorities here, both of them equally valid. One, protecting and safeguarding the employment at Ferguson's, but we have stated on numerous occasions now we are absolutely determined to get these vessels delivered and in service, and I'm confident that the Programme Board will come forward with their best assessment as to when those will be delivered, and that will give us a basis to then communicate with our stakeholders, including your constituents and also the operators, as to when these vessels will enter service after sea trials and so forth. So we're absolutely focused on that, I promise, Mr Finney.
Okay, thank you.
Just before we move on to Ms Lyle's question, I've got a quick question. Apparently there was a gentleman who looked at both female and female and reported to the government, and he was appointed in June 2018, a Commodore. Is that correct?
Commodore Luke Van Beek has worked for us. His primary role was to try and assess, as time was progressing, whether difficulties were arising at the yards and communicate them to CMAL and to government. So, question, Minister, when did you become nervous that his reports were indicating that this project wasn't going to work? What month? I couldn't say precisely. I've been nervous about the issues at Ferguson's from the minute I was first engaged in this, because there were obviously challenges with a project which was already in some difficulty. So I think I wouldn't want to overplay that. We were obviously relying on professional advice. Mr. Commodore Van Beek was very helpful in assessing the degree to which activity was happening on the yard. And clearly we were also having communication from Ferguson's about their estimates about delivery timescales, but we had some concerns because Commodore Van Beek was challenging some of the assessments that Ferguson were bringing forward. So before Christmas or after Christmas, let's broaden it out. I mean, there must have come a stage when you were reading these monthly reports that you went, this isn't going to work. Well, certainly we were concerned. I mean, clearly I came into position as the Cabinet Secretary last June. And there were obviously concerns about slippage in the already revised timescales, even at last summer. And I think I've had exchanges in the Chamber about these matters with members across the Chamber. It is difficult when you have the yard providing estimates for delivery, which you've also got evidence coming forward from Mr Van Beek and indeed others involved with the yard, including some in the workforce, saying actually we think it's going to be difficult to deliver on those timescales. But clearly, as Mr Finney has indicated, and you've also indicated, Convener, there may well be Parliament, we will want to scrutinise what has happened, and we will certainly do what we can to furnish the committee and others with as much information as we go along. But this has always been a challenging project from the day it started, because these are challenging designs, and it was already very challenging by the time I came to post.
Okay, we'll leave that one there then, and we'll move on to the next question, which is Richard. Richard Lark.
Yes, and the designs are very challenging, and maybe the factor of the delay, and certainly, you know, all these things may have to come out in an inquiry and find out exactly what happened, who happened, when did it happen. I just love these inquiries. Right, can you tell me what impact has the delay in the delivery of the 2 ferries, including the likelihood of increased costs, had on the wider CMAL procurement strategy? Will CMAL continue to procure untried ferry designs, or revert back to the more tried and tested systems? And would you answer the fact, will the delay of the 2 new ferries impact on the timing of the procurement of other replacement ferries vessels required for the network? I have continually over the last number of months suggested that we have to continue to buy or procure ferries over the next number of years to replace the ageing fleet, and not necessarily big, but other people have suggested smaller ferries. So can you give us a full account of the question I've asked?
I think Mr Lyle raises some really important issues. I certainly wouldn't want to suggest in any way, shape or form that these are not issues that haven't been confronted before, but we are clearly trying to address the long-term investment needs of the fleet. As I've said to Mr Finney, I'm very conscious of the impact on Mr Finney's constituents and others' constituents of disruption that's caused by unexpected maintenance issues on vessels, because they are working hard. Many of them have been in service for many years. That's not unusual. It's always been the case that there's a replacement cycle for vessels, but clearly with RET and other measures being implemented, their demands on the ferry fleet are probably greater than they have been at any time in their history. So therefore the assets are being worked hard, which is a good thing, because they're providing good services for communities, but it does mean that we have to look to replace and renew the fleet as we go forward. So we are concerned to make sure that we address the concerns of local communities, particularly in the islands, who depend on them for lifeline services, and are set to benefit from deployment of the 2 new vessels that we've discussed already. We share the frustrations about the delays, as has been referred to by members. And CMAL continues to search the second-hand market to see if there are appropriate vessels that we can bring into service. So far, it'd be fair to say that has been challenging, because in many theatres of operation, the vessels are inappropriate for the kind of waters dealing with. They maybe have even things like the wrong centre of gravity for the kind of wave environment they're going to be facing, and also the depth of the water, the shallow draft in some cases is we need for some of our ports and harbours is a challenge as well. Going forward, we are trying to look in terms of the VRDP, the Vessel Replacement Deployment Plan, the Ferries Plan, trying to look at how we can standardise vessel design to address the issue around the cost of vessel fabrication. It's fair to say that in general, the first of class normally loses a yard money, and they make subsequent money on building the second, third, fourth and successive vessels. And that is challenging if we're procuring vessels on a bespoke basis for bespoke routes. So we are looking very seriously at how we can perhaps standardise vessel design, and that may mean investment in ports and harbours and dredging to ensure that we have interoperability of those vessels, so they can, when one goes out of service, another vessel can take its place and then provide the same service on that route. And CMAL is engaging very closely with, in this case, the operator CalMac, and CMAL is also currently working with officials in Transport Scotland and CalMac to develop a programme for major vessels and small vessels with the aim of achieving that increased standardisation, although this has to also take account of the many and varied CalMac routes that are served. But as always, we'll look to learn from previous ferry designs and apply that experience to new vessel projects such as the forthcoming Isla vessel, which is likely to be based very closely, the design is underway. It's likely to be based very closely on the Finlagan, which is already in service, to try and, again, minimise the reinventing the wheel. And also for vessels for Gourock Dunoon, where we're going to engage with stakeholders to try and come up with vessels which are more resilient for that route going forward. And consult with communities, trade unions, obviously the operators in doing that. So we are trying to refresh the approach we take, but it's worth noting that the ferries that we deploy need to be appropriate for the conditions in which they operate.
So you have some ferries, as I say, basically it depends on the way the energy they use or the type of, my colleague Angus MacDonald asked you about an electric ferry, which I'm sure is quite novel. So basically, in a shorter answer, because I can see the convener's getting a bit on time, in regards to development of the Scottish Ferries Plan, when would you expect formal public consultation? And last October, we did write to you and say it was imperative that the Scottish Government developed a full coordinated strategy for the staged ongoing replacement of vessels. We have so many different pier types, so many different landing types, shallow draft, deep draft. So when is it your intention to review the ferries plan, and will you deliver on these objectives?
That's I suppose the last point is a very significant one, and I will try and keep it short because I'm conscious of time. I do believe that we are in an opportunity to get this right and to sort of build on previous work, the previous ferries plan, the previous, which is obviously still in force, the previous vessel replacement deployment plan, and try and innovate in how we're doing that. We are already beginning to engage around the ferries plan itself. Maybe if I can ask Chris to come briefly and remind me of the timescales for delivery of that. But clearly that is a key exercise that will be one that we want to take forward. And as I say, in parallel with that, we are doing work already on the Isla vessel. So it's not a case that we're waiting for that ferries plan to come forward before we look at investment in additional capacity. We've got the two vessels that we've discussed already coming through the system. We expect the Isla vessel to be able to be deployed by 2023, and that is our objective. But if I can maybe bring Chris just to talk about the timescale.
Timescale for the new ferries plan.
So it has to be in place by the end of 2022, and we're looking to conduct this work kind of flowing through the National Transport Strategy and the Strategic Transport Projects Review with the STPR2 being the kind of key document that will lead for Ferries Plan 2.
Thank you. I think we're at the end of that session. Paul, you can take a back seat for the moment, maybe as Colin heads off on the next questions. Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm going to turn the Committee's attention to the issue of ScotRail performance. And could I ask, a decision on whether to end the current ScotRail franchise at its first expiry date of the 31st of March 2022 needs to be taken over the next few months. Can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary could clarify exactly what the timescale is for this particular decision?
So there's a provision within the franchise that at the 5th anniversary that the franchise needs to be, there's the option for it to be rebased. We are now coming to the 5th anniversary. So Abellio ScotRail need to submit a rebasing proposal by the end of this month for our consideration. And that then allows us to then consider that and to then make a decision on whether we want to continue with the franchise, and that decision needs to be made in order to make a decision in March 2020.
Okay, so March 2020, the final decision would have to be made. This is about, I think, around the time that ScotRail's remedial plan forecasts them exiting breach level. Would you be seriously considering extending the contract to 2025 if they're still in breach at this point?
There's a number of factors that need to be taken into account in determining whether we continue with the franchise or not, including their rebasing proposal, but also the progress which they're making in terms of addressing issues contained within the remedial plans. All of those factors alongside a range of other measures that we have to think about the future direction of rail. So we have the Williams Review that's been taking place at the present time. What proposals will flow from the Williams Review that could have an impact on us here in Scotland, and future options that we may wish to pursue. So there's a range of different factors that we need to take into account in coming to that decision. It's not based on one factor on its own, and issues in relation to progress they're making on the areas relating to the remedial plan would be one of the items we'd be looking at.
Clearly, performance will, I presume, be the key. Can I just clarify what the position is regarding performance targets? Because the last time you updated the committee on ScotRail's performance, you said you expect them to hit their franchise performance target of 92.5% by March 2021. Now, last week, Alec Hines said to the committee that ScotRail don't expect to reach this until the end of 2021. So I can ask what the reason is for the difference between these two figures, and do you stand by your previous projection to this committee that ScotRail will hit the 92.5% target by March 2021?
So we covered this before at committee. You may recall when in March, when I responded to a topical, the figure which I used in the topical was a figure which was relating to the Donovan Review trajectory of reaching the target. Subsequent to that, the ORR have published a target which they believe is the later target. And the confusion I created was not being clear about which target I was making reference to. So the ORR, based upon what they believe that Network Rail need to put in place, gives you the 2022 target. The Donovan Review was the target which I referred to back in March.
So effectively what we're saying is that they've failed to deliver what the Donovan Review said they would deliver, which would be to meet that performance target by March 2021, are likely to fail to do that based on what the ORR said. What's your view? I mean, are they going to hit it in March 2021? Are they going to hit it at all? Or will it be the end of 2021? What's your own view?
So the first thing to say is, I think it's wrong to say that they haven't been implementing the provisions within the Donovan Review.
But it won't meet the target. Donovan Review was to hit that target in March 2021.
Okay.
And nobody's saying they're going to do that.
Let me try and answer your question. So what they're doing is they're implementing the provisions within the Donovan Review, and that set a trajectory when they thought they would get to 92.5 it being reached. What subsequently happened is that in looking at the works, the further works that Network Rail need to take forward on infrastructure, the ORR have said they don't believe that ScotRail will be able to reach that target for at least a further year. And what we now need to do is to see what further measures can be taken forward in order to try and accelerate that. So the trajectory that's been set by the ORR is the 2022 figure that you made reference to. And what we need to do is to make sure that Network Rail are making the progress that's necessary in order to help to deliver that 92.5%.
But by the end of 2021, is that when you're saying they'll hit that?
No, what I've said to you is that there are two different dates here. There is the Donovan
I'm
Review.
asking you what date you think ScotRail will deliver their performance target.
The Donovan Review trajectory was for it to be delivered in 2021.
March 2021, that's right, yeah.
So however, the ORR, their consideration, their further assessment of it is that they don't believe it can be met within that time frame because of the works that they believe that has to be undertaken in infrastructure in order to deliver that 92.5%.
But when do you think they'll meet the target, though?
Well, it appears to me that the ORR target is likely to be more accurate, given that we're already seeing progress with the Donovan Review recommendations, which is delivering improvements, but the wider infrastructure improvements that are necessary will be critical to helping to support ScotRail and be able to deliver that 92.5%.
On this year performance, can I turn to the second remedial plan, which was around passenger satisfaction? That projects that ScotRail's satisfaction level for this year will be 84%, which is well below the franchise target. According to the franchise, this would normally constitute an event of default because it's the second year running that they failed to hit the target, but obviously this can't be enforced because a remedial plan is in place. Why did you agree to a remedial plan which effectively would normally be a default of the franchise? It would be yet another failure for ScotRail to actually meet their customer satisfaction targets that we've set in that franchise.
So, we discussed this previously at committee as well, and that was that the remedial plan is there to address the areas where breach is taking place. and the measures have to be implemented over a set time frame in order to address where the breach is taking place. And that's exactly what the remedial plan in performance is intended to do. Therefore, the measures which are set out within the remedial plan are about addressing the issue relating to the breach that's taking place. And that's exactly what the plan is intended to do. So that's part of the contractual arrangements that's set out within it. So you have a contract with a rail provider. They go into breach in it. There's a mechanism that you can then choose to employ in order to address where they're in breach. In this case, in performance, they then have to bring forward a range of measures that they will take forward in order to get them out of breach. And that's exactly what the remedial plan is intended to do, and that's why the progress we're making is allowing us to see the improved performance that we're starting to see in a number of different areas.
But the reality is that performance is still not good enough, even within the remedial plan. It seems to me the remedial plan is very lax, because there would have been a default in the franchise had it simply been the franchise that was being followed. But your remedial plan effectively gives them leeway to continue to fail to ultimately meet that contractual obligation. I mean, the reality is they would never, based on their projections, even in year 3, they wouldn't meet that 8 to 8.5% target in the franchise. They're only going to meet it because they're projecting 8 to 8%, and Transport Scotland have obviously reduced the target to 87.5%. So that's a number of years where they're failing to meet those targets. Why are we letting them off the hook with a remedial plan that frankly doesn't deliver what is in the franchise agreement?
So you say the remedial plan, I take it from what you're suggesting, isn't making any difference.
No, I'm saying that it's not setting sufficient targets to deliver what we said should be delivered in the franchise.
As we discussed previously at this committee, and we had exchanges on this matter, is that the remedial plan is there to address the breach. That's exactly what it's aiming to do. If they, as a franchisee, fail to deliver on that, any of the conditions that are set out within the remedial plan, and if they fail to get out of breach, then they are in default and the franchise can be terminated. So the consequences for Abellio ScotRail in failing to deliver on the remedial plan is extremely serious. And I think that's reflected by the fact that they are making good progress in a range of the different provisions were set out within the remedial plan, including the additional financial investments being made in order to achieve that. However, some of the benefits that will come from the remedial plan will take longer to be delivered than would be purely because of the complexity of actually addressing these issues. So, for example, the recruitment of an extra 55 drivers is not something which they can do overnight. It takes time for them to go through the recruitment process, the training process, and then to deploy them into the rail network and to get route knowledge in order to be able to work in the route network. So there's a range of different things that take time to realise the benefits that come from them. But the consequences of failing to deliver on a remedial plan and to get out of breach is very serious for the franchise holder.
But you accept that the remedial plan targets are lower than the original franchise target, and what they're being asked to do is deliver a customer satisfaction level lower than the franchise agreement, which is 8.5%. The
remedial plan is to address the breach, not to address the issue of the franchise target.
Right. I'm going to have to bring in some other committee members. I think you've had a fair run at that, Colin. Jamie wants to come in, and we'll see where we go from there. Jamie.
Thank you, Convener. I do share Mr Smith's concerns around performance targets and the metrics that we're monitoring as a committee, but my instinct is that the public are less interested in who runs a railway, but how it is run and how it performs. So on that, if we get to a situation next year where the current franchise operator is not meeting either its remedial plans or its contractual obligations under the franchise, what options are available to the government and what preparatory work has been done to accommodate any eventuality, because it is only 6 months away. So, for example, would you be able to put yourself in a position to be the operator of last resort if that were an option that was open to you, or what other options would be available to the government to step in if they deemed that Abellio were not operating the franchise as it should?
So if they fail to deliver on their remedial plan and to get out of breach, then they are in default, and we have the option of terminating the franchise. which would then allow us to employ operator of last resort. So it's got very serious consequences for them. So, and they're fully aware of that.
My question was what preparatory work has been done at the government level to accommodate that option if it were to be chosen by yourself?
We have ongoing plans for putting in place a provision for operator of last resort. We've got various contracts with consultants and agencies who would support us in delivering that if that was necessary. So that's part of our requirement as the franchise goes forward. So we have arrangements and contracts in place so that if we had to employ operator of last resort, we'd be in a position to be able to do so.
Thank you.
Colin, do you want to come back with one more question?
The final question is around the significant disruption we've seen in recent weeks, which is a significant impact on passengers. Can I ask if you're personally absolutely confident that Abellio have both the resources and the ability to get their act together and deal with some of the shambolic service disruptions that passengers have suffered in recent weeks?
Well, look, some of the disruption which has been experienced, particularly in August the 24th in Edinburgh, was completely unacceptable, and stated that at the time, and the experience that some passengers had in that particular evening was unacceptable, and ScotRail Abellio accept that as well. It is worth noting that during the festival period that there was a significant uplift in train capacity, 20% increase in capacity during that period of time, which was a result of the new rolling stock, which allowed greater seat capacity to be provided, plus also the extension of the lines in Queen Street, which allowed 8 carriages to be used as well. Some routes, for example, as well into Stirling and Dunblane, saw a 3-digit increase in capacity during that period of time because of the additional rolling stock. So, by and large, up until that point, performance had been going relatively well. The issues on the 24th of August clearly demonstrate the way in which the rail system was overwhelmed by the demand that was placed on it. And as I mentioned in the Chamber last week, what's important is that we look at the existing mechanisms and systems we have in place for the planning and the management of these types of events to identify where there are other measures that we have to take forward, and that work is being undertaken at the present time. And as part of that, ScotRail have also commissioned a review of how they handled the planning and also the day itself and the event itself, and to look at what lessons can be learned from that, and they expect that to be completed by the end of this month. So my answer to Mr Smith is that we need to look at what lessons can be learned from the events of that particular evening. And until we have the completed report and further assessment of it, at this stage I'm not able to advise you as to what further measure we put in place in order to try and prevent that type of thing from happening again in the future.
Sorry, can I just ask a question on that? I mean, I was quite confused by Alec Hines' comment to the committee last week. What he said was, you may recall, the weather was rather good that day. We took many people into Edinburgh, and clearly the number of people who wanted to travel back created pressure on the system. That kind of suggests that it's the passengers' fault. You know, ScotRail must have had some indication with the amount of tickets they were selling that there'd be a huge demand to get out again in the evening once all the events had finished. And his option was, well, we'll close the station so the passengers have to walk, I suggest, further so they can get their service. Do you think that's really what the passengers want to hear? It's not what I, as a passenger, would want to hear, Cabinet Secretary.
I think part of the challenge has been able to try and assess the level of demand that will be that you will experience on that particular date, because we have a turn up and use rail system. So many people turn up without a ticket, so it's very difficult to predict how many people will come along. So that in itself creates pressures and creates particular challenges in managing the events. There is a need for. I want to take a step back from the 24th of August, because there were a variety of events taking place on that particular day that were in the calendar and were known. What we need to do is to take a step back to look at, was the planning process to manage the potential demand which would come from these events sufficient in order to try and manage that type of increased passenger numbers that would be experienced. if we look at experience in the past when it's come to major events, is that the system has by and large managed very well with it. There will be times when there's congestion, etc. There is long waits, but by and large it's been managed very well. So they've got good experience, as have the other agencies that are involved in providing transport planning. They've got good experience in managing these types of events. The issue I want to do is to make sure we take a step back to understand what measures were then subsequently put in place in addition to the additional capacity that was provided to meet the Edinburgh Festival demand. The fact that we had the rugby match taking place, we had a football match taking place, it was an English bank holiday, all of the things that we know would have created demand in the system, did we take a step back enough sufficiently to look at what further measures we need to put in place in order to address that? And that's that wider piece of work that I think is important. So I know that Edinburgh, Lothian buses were, the buses were struggling as well. So there's a wider piece of work there that we need to look at. So we're going to have big events like that happening at the same time, which is fine. We just need to look at how can we ensure that we are managing those events more effectively. And there's no doubt in my mind what happened on the 24th of August was a breakdown in that process. Before we start putting in place new measures, let's make sure we understand properly the planning process and how that was executed and what lessons can be learned from that.
And I think passengers, just as an observation, were rightly annoyed that the money was taken off them to get them into the venue and the money taken off them to get them back from the venue. But they couldn't get back because there wasn't the transport. And that reflects poorly on rail travel. And what we all want to see is more people using the railways. So I would welcome that piece of work, and I think wide consultation on how to achieve that would be useful. Stuart, you wanted to come in, and then I'm coming to John.
Thank you, Convener. This calendar year, I'm just approaching 300 hours on ScotRail services, and I estimate I've had disruption that's less than 1% of that period of time. That's approximately 11 train journeys a week. But clearly for us in the north in particular, the delays in the delivery of refurbished HSTs are causing low-level disruption and difficulties for ScotRail in scheduling some of their services. To what extent is the government involved with Angel Trains and with Wabtec in assisting ScotRail to demand and achieve delivery of the contracts that have been entered into?
We've had regular contact, particularly with Wabtec and Angel Trains around the HSTs. I've spoken to the global head of Wabtec in the US about this very matter, the chief executive and the chair of Angel Trains, in order to look at what further measures could be undertaken to speed up the refurbishment programme. Wabtec have extended their production line in Kilmarnock in order to undertake some of the HST work there to try and help to speed up that process. They have also looked at, as you were aware, the use of unrefurbished HSTs in order to provide greater capacity there. So there continues to be engagement with them to try and press for the refurbishment programme to be completed as quickly as possible. But Mr Stevenson does make a good point. It has had an impact on performance and capacity in some routes because of delay in having the HSTs available for these routes, particularly in the north of Scotland.
John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Cabinet Secretary, I'd like to ask you about the Caledonian sleeper performance, if I may, please. And it is perhaps, to dwell briefly on the figures aspect, I think it's, people aren't greatly hooked up in figures, they just want the train to be on time, quite simply. And there's a lower expectation on Serco, the present operator, where in fact the PPM figure is 80%, well short of the low 90s that we talk with other. I'd like you to comment on a number of aspects connected with the franchise, if you could, please, Cabinet Secretary. So, Serco have been very strong in the PR, and the sale was that they were going to deliver a hotel on wheels. We're well short of that, and the hotel doesn't go to the places the hotel was going to go. We're well short of that. They've sacked their cleaning company, so if you could comment on that, please. The RMT, and perhaps I should declare my membership of the Parliamentary RMT Group, convener. The RMT are voting to take industrial action. Let me tell you what they're taking industrial action about or considering. I quote here, insufficient staffing levels, insufficient training, and an unresponsive management regime. Now, we know there's further delay connected with the delivery of the coaches, are they subject to penalty? They're not meeting their contract? Are they subject to penalty for their rolling stock failure or indeed the performance? Cabinet Secretary?
Yes, they are. So they are they're subject to penalties for failing to deliver on the new rolling stock and the impact that has in performance as part of the franchise.
And are you able to say what form the penalties take, please?
I can't give you the figures because they're commercially sensitive, but they are subject to penalties and they have been applied.
And I don't go with this commercially sensitive. Why are they commercially sensitive? This is a public operation funded by public money. Why would a penalty imposed for failure to deliver on a public service contract fall into the category considered like that? I know Serco would like it to be considered like that, but why do you accept that situation?
Well, it's part of the contract agreement, it's part of the franchise, is that the penalties which are applied are commercially confidential. So, and that's part of the provision.
That's different from the ScotRail contract where the Squire regime, we're fully familiar with the penalties that are applied and how the money is dispersed. So why is it different for Serco?
The Squire regime is different, isn't it, for the ScotRail contract than it is for maybe if I ask Bill Reeves, he can possibly explain that to you in more detail. But it's a different arrangement that's in place for the Caledonian Sleeper service.
Well, perhaps, if I may, before going to Mr Roach, one of the purposes of the Squire regime is to penalise cleanliness issues. Clearly, Serco haven't been happening. Is that a factor in the performance that's been penalised?
They were issued with an improvement notice because of the cleanliness issues, and one of the consequences of that is that Serco removed their existing cleaning provider and appointed a new cleaning provider for their carriages. But maybe just to give you more details on the Squire aspect, if that would be helpful, and how it's different from the ScotRail arrangement to that of the Caledonian Sleeper.
Well, just to confirm that Squire does apply to the cleanliness and preparation of the sleeper vehicles. We did detect a deficiency in the level of cleaning. There has been action taken by Serco to improve the quality of the cleaning, and there is an improvement plan in place for Serco to address that under a Squire improvement plan. With respect to the financial penalties, at the moment, of course, Serco is in dispute with its supplier, CAF, and you'll appreciate during periods of commercial dispute, it's not always helpful to have amounts of money in the public domain. But I can confirm that substantial financial penalties are being applied.
I wonder, Mr Reeve, in relation to the application of Squire to the Caledonian Sleeper contract, I don't suppose you have the figures at hand, but could you provide them to the committee, to the committee clerk, to share with the...
I don't have the figures immediately at hand, but I can confirm there's an improvement plan and we can provide some more information.
I'm particularly interested in the aspect of a financial penalty and what elements are or aren't made public, because clearly it would seem peculiar that we have two public train services operating in Scotland, and if the Squire regime, the penalties were to be made public in respect of one operator but not another, that would seem to be odd.
And I understand that point, and I will go away and check the provision with respect to Squire as distinct from the COPA. The contractual provisions about late provision of rolling stock.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Cabinet Secretary, on the issue of the company that's actually operating this, Serco, they're a company that's not regarded by the trade union movement and many others for the way they conduct their business. They're seen as a very predatory company. This is a company that's subject to legal action in respect of a number of matters in Scotland, not least locking out very vulnerable and homeless people. I've asked before the Scottish Government's approach to the issue of reputational damage. Can you say, when it comes to the contract and the ongoing assessment of the contract, what, if any, consideration is given to reputational damage by the operator during the course of the contract? That's, sorry for the avoidance of that, that's reputational damage to the Scottish Government caused by the operator.
Well, look, I'm conscious that Serco provide a whole range of different services, and the Caledonian Sleeper is just one of them in itself. In terms of the actual strict legal procurement process for assessing a contract and a bid for a contract, I would have to check with procurement colleagues because there are obviously legal issues around this that I want to be careful about to just check exactly what provision there is for reputational damage matters to be considered as part of any assessment of a contract. So I don't have that information, but I'm more than happy to go away and try to come back with details on exactly how that's conducted through the procurement process and assessing any contract.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Two final questions, if I may, Cabinet Secretary. Then. That's the commercial legal aspect. The political aspect of reputational damage, that's something that surely, as a Cabinet Secretary in the Scottish Government, you can comment on. You can't be pleased that a Scottish Government is associated with a company that conducts itself like this.
Well, we're very clear as a company, as a government, about what we expect companies to do in terms of the trade union representation, living wage, etc., the whole fair work agenda, and we encourage and we work with companies who have public sector contracts to encourage them and to support them to comply with their fair work agenda. That's something we'll continue to do. So, but in relation to there are legal issues around the idea that you effectively go down a route of saying that company is not allowed to bid for contracts for a particular service on the basis that they have another contract for something which I don't agree with or don't like, which I think is a very complex and difficult legal area to go into. And I would be wrong to try and sit here and answer that to you. So, for example, the fact that Serco have the contract for the lock changing system, which is operated by the Home Office, which I don't like, does that allow me then, or does it allow the Scottish Government to say, actually, but we're not going to allow you then to bid for a contract for delivering rail services for us? So I'm afraid I can't answer that legally, whether we are in a position where you can actually choose to pick and choose who bids for the contract on the basis of not being supportive of a contract that they have in another area for an area of work that you don't agree with.
Of course, when you respond from your legal colleagues about the procurement process and what implications, if any, there are about reputational damage, you'll be in a position to assess whether, if it's not a factor that's existing, that's present in existing contracts, that it's something that could be applied to future contracts. Because, of course, contracts have various aspects about value, price, all the... That's surely something...
We're into procurement law here and contract law here, and I'm not going to try and give you an easy answer to that, but I'm happy to take that point away and to explore what scope there is within procurement and contract law for making that type, to offer that type of weighting to any contract.
It would seem, Convener, that the Cabinet Secretary's predicted my next question and already answered it, which was, it seems like you're not going to exclude Serco from the Northern Isles contract.
But that's a live contract which has been assessed, and I'm not going to go into that while it's gone through the procurement process. It'd be wrong to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. The next question then is from Mike Rumbles. Mike.
Thanks, Convener. And I'd like to turn to Prestwick Airport to follow up a few questions. First of all, I understand that just before the recess, the Scottish Government put Glasgow Prestwick Airport up for sale, and I personally think that's a very good thing to have done, and I think that's a very positive thing the Scottish Government is trying to do. So how confident are you in finding a buyer, given that the airport owes the taxpayer, us, over £40 million, and it hasn't made a profit in any of the last 10 years?
So the reason that we put the notice out, or we agreed for the management team at Prestwick Glasgow Airport to issue the notice for interested parties is because there had been a number of parties who had expressed an interest or had noted an interest in Prestwick as an aviation facility, and we therefore decided that now was a good time to test the market, to see exactly how concrete that interest was. And that was the reason why we agreed to the request from Glasgow Prestwick's management team to issue notice for any interested parties to express an interest. So that's the principal reason. When you say that that it hasn't made a profit in the course of the last 10 years, that may be the case. However, as a facility, it's extremely important to the Ayrshire economy. And plays an extremely important part in sustaining a number of businesses within the aviation sector and within the engineering sector that are clustered around the airport as a result of the aviation facility being there. So, although it may not have made a profit as an airport, it plays an extremely important part in the regional economy within Ayrshire, which is exactly why the Scottish Government stepped in at the time, because of the potential consequences of the facility closing and the wider impact that would actually have. It'd be fair to say that the management team at Prestwick have been making good progress in reducing their losses and are continuing to make good progress in looking to grow the markets that they are operating within, and they continue to work hard in order to reduce the losses which they're making.
When I asked you in the Chamber of Parliament yesterday if you were aware that the largest single source of income for Prestwick Airport was from the US military, you didn't answer my question. You gave me a lot of other information, but you didn't actually answer my question. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask this question again. Are you aware that the largest single income stream for Prestwick Airport comes from the US military? And what implications you are aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah. What implications does that have for any potential new buyer of the airport?
In what way?
Does it have any implications for the whoever buys that airport, that they will know that that is the largest income stream for the airport?
Well, any company that was going to purchase the airport would go through a process of due diligence, and they would know they would know the income streams for the airport as it stands at the present moment. So they would, so that's normal practice in any company going into purchase a facility.
That's my point, because I don't believe that it's widely known until now that the largest income stream for Prestwick Airport is from the US military. And so I'm interested in who might be...
Can I ask you, on what basis do you say that?
Pardon?
On what basis do you say that you don't think that companies who might be interested in Prestwick wouldn't know that that's a major source of income?
Well, I don't think it's been widely... Well, genuinely, I don't think it has been widely known. I don't think we've widely known that. Members of this committee have known that.
I'm a little bit concerned that you are now asking the committee questions. I think the job of this committee is to ask you questions. So I'm going to let Mike ask another question, and then I'm going to bring in Richard Lyle, John Finney, and I'll come back to Mike Rumbles.
I think it's rather... the point I'm trying to make is that it's a rather unique situation with Prestwick Airport. And I'm just trying to find out whether you think, as the owner of the airport, whether you think it's a viable prospect, really, for other companies to purchase.
But that's for other companies to assess.
No, I'm asking your opinion. I'm asking your opinion, Minister.
Yes. So, what do you call it, is my opinion. So, or we wouldn't have put it up for sale. Any company coming in to purchase the airport would have access to all of the data relating to the income that the airport has and the sources of where that income comes from. So they would access to all that through the data room process. So they'd be able to make that assessment. Any company that's thinking of purchasing any business is going to go through that process of due diligence so that they understand what they're purchasing and where the income that the business is making just now, where that's coming from. So when you say, and the reason I asked you the question, why would anybody who was interested in purchasing Prestwick not go through that process? Well, that's a normal standard due process that any responsible company or individual would go through in looking to purchase a business.
Well, can I make the point that we've interrogated, to use that word, questioned the company, and we did not find that information out. When we were trying to find out their sources of income stream, we were told that the one major operator is Ryanair, etc., etc. All this information wasn't given to the committee, and it has not been widely known until now, and I'm glad that you've confirmed that. Thank you.
Well, can I just come back to you on that point, though? Because the information that Prestwick, as a company that's operating at arm's length to the Scottish Government, has to do is that they have to comply with commercial legislation in publishing their accounts and the details of those accounts. What those accounts will detail is the information that they are legally obliged to place in the public domain. What it will not do is it will not give you details down to how much income they have from individual businesses that make use of them.
That's my
and the
point.
reason, yeah, but the reason that won't be available is because that's commercially sensitive, and potentially that's the information that your competitors would want in order to actually to challenge you. So that's common practice within the commercial sector, that type of individual information is not placed in the public domain. It's not peculiar to Prestwick Airport.
Richard, yours is the next question.
Thank you, Uncle Sam. As far as I'm concerned, Prestwick Airport can take money off of everybody. There's such a thing as Data Protection Act, there's such a thing as the Secrets Act, there's such a thing as commercial secrecy. At the end of the day, my view has always been Prestwick Airport is a jewel in the crown in Scotland. Actually, I can reach Prestwick Airport from my house due to the roads you have now upgraded, M74, M8. I can reach it quicker than I can reach Edinburgh Airport. People tend to forget. The question I'm going to ask you is, are we deliberately speaking to any airline provider to give them the slots? We've got an excellent airport. It's well served by roads. It's well served by rail. It's got plenty of parking. Why isn't some commercial airline looking to fill the slots at Prestwick? That's the question.
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary, before I go on to John Finney and then Jamie Green.
Okay, because it operates arm's length to the Scottish Government, it's not the Scottish Government that's pursuing commercial interests, as in looking to have other suppliers to have contracts with Prestwick. It's the Prestwick Airport Management Team that are responsible for that. You'll be aware that within the regional airline industry, there are financial challenges where there's been contraction in the market. We can see that right across Europe. In fact, you can see it across in North America as well. And that obviously is having an impact on the decisions which airlines are making. Prestwick Airport will continue to face challenges in attracting passenger services to it. Largely because of the position that we have with both Glasgow and Edinburgh airports, but also just because of where the marketplaces are as well. So that will continue to be a challenge for them. But the management team at Prestwick have been pursuing a range of other areas in order to help to improve the financial position at Prestwick, including the growth of stopovers and refuelling provision for planes landing there and stopping over there, and they've been successful in doing that. And the reason they've been successful in doing that is because it's a market they have specifically targeted, which has resulted in a growth within that sector, which is why they're seeing that the overall cost, if I'm correct, I think the actual figures or the information I have from the management team at Prestwick Airport is that the number of military aircraft has reduced, but the volume of fuel which are selling has increased because of the nature of the aircraft which are landing. So it tends to be C-17s which take more fuel, also tanker aircraft which are for refuelling other aircraft coming in to refuel. So I think strictly they were saying that the actual numbers are actually down, but it's the nature of the aircraft which are coming in which is actually requiring greater fuelling.
Thank you.
John, followed by Jamie. Could I ask committee members to keep the questions as brief as possible? We are halfway through the questions we've got to ask. We're kind of more than halfway through the time we have. So, John.
Thank you, Convener. I'll be very brief. Cabinet Secretary, will the Scottish Government rule out selling Prestwick Airport or any part thereof to the US military?
We're in the middle of a process just now where the management team at Prestwick Airport are considering, having advertised the airport for being for sale. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to enter into speculation about who, if anybody, would be purchasing the airport, because it could infringe on the integrity of that process. I don't want to be evasive, and I'm not deliberately trying to be evasive. I'm trying to protect the procurement or the process that the management team at Prestwick are undertaking at the present time. So I'm not going to enter into any speculation about any potential purchase or purchaser of the airport.
Thank you. Jamie Green.
Thanks, Convener. Can I just ask quite simply, it's quite clear that over the last few years we've had this conversation about Prestwick many times, and the passenger number side of the business has been dwindling. There's only one client left in that respect. Given all the other opportunities that the airport presents as an asset to Scotland and the Ayrshire economy, and I fully support measures to keep that going, we also as a committee have a duty to ensure that taxpayers' money has been spent wisely and dutifully. Can I ask, therefore, if the potential purchasers who may or may not be coming forward, if the payback of the loan funding that's been given to the airport is a prerequisite in the acquisition of the airport? In other words, if someone buys the airport, do they have to pay that money back, or would some other form of commercial deal take place to allow a different settlement?
Convener, given the sensitivity of where we are in this process, I'm not going to get drawn into any scope around speculating about any potential deal for the purchase of the airport, which, unfortunately, Mr Green, you're tempting me to do, largely because it would suggest that we have taken a particular position in the matter during a live process of considering any interest in the airport. So again, I'm not trying to be unhelpful, and I'm more than happy, once we're in a position, to update Parliament and to update the committee on any decisions and the outcome of any decisions that are made in relation to this issue. But just given where we are in this process, it would be inappropriate for me to enter into any speculation of that nature.
When might that be, Cabinet Secretary? Just, do you have a rough estimate of?
Well, the timeline was set out by the management team within Prestwick Airport and the eligibility criteria, and they are continuing to work to that time frame.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question, Cabinet Secretary? Is it Prestwick Airport Limited the government's selling, or Prestwick Airport Infrastructure Limited, or is it both?
I would have to check. It will be in the eligibility criteria set out in the document, but I'm sure. But I can't, off the top of my head, remember whether it's one or the other or both of them.
Well, different companies with different accounts. I mean, it's just Prestwick Airport Limited, with a capital value in the balance sheet at March 2018 of 3.75 million. Despite £40 million invested in it.
More than happy to clarify that for you.
It just concerns me that for paying 40 million in, we've got an asset valued at 3.75 million in the accounts. Doesn't seem to stack up to me. We must have burnt 36 million. Could you clarify that for the committee?
I'm more happy to do that.
Thank you. The next question, therefore, is Emma Harper. Emma.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to add Jamie's issue about Prestwick and supporting the Ayrshire economy, but also the southwest of Scotland. Folk fae, Wigtonshire, Dumfries, Stranraer, they use Prestwick Airport as well as a passenger route. So there is the opportunity to support the southwest of Scotland as well for travel. But my questions are about focusing on the Queensferry crossing, and in May, when you were here, I wasn't a member at the time, but there were issues raised about tower lifts on Queensferry crossing where the lifts hadn't been installed prior to the opening of the bridge, problems with ice formation on the bridge and other snagging works like deck painting. So I will keep my question brief. Cabinet Secretary, are the remaining works to the Queensferry crossing, including works to rectify the issues about ice formation on the bridge, still on track for completion by the end of this year?
So the snagging works are on track to be completed according to the contractor by the end of this year, weather permitting, because some of it is weather related, but they are on track to be completed this year. The issue of ice formation is not an unusual issue. and some assessment work has been undertaken to look at what further measures could be put in place to try and address that. But it's not an unusual challenge on structures of this nature. But the snagging work should be completed by the end of this year, weather permitting.
And the ice formation, is that particular to the actual road surface or to other structures on the bridge?
It's upper structures, my understanding. I can ask Michelle, can maybe, as an engineer, can give you some more technical details around that, but it's in the upper structures.
That's right. I'm an engineer, but I'm not an ice expert. I understand that that's not a phenomenon that's particular to this bridge or this structure. It arises as a combination of weather conditions, wind and temperature. So we're looking at a range of different technological solutions there, and also the kind of processes that we would put in place to clear ice and to give motorists advance warning of any weather conditions.
Okay.
I think it would be just helpful as a result of that question. You kindly, Cabinet Secretary, provided a list of snagging works that were outstanding to the committee some time ago. Would it be possible to ask for that list is updated and submitted back to the committee so we could see it with completion times?
Yeah, more than happy to do that.
And can I just confirm that when it's completed at Christmas, fingers crossed, that will be the end of the lane closures on the Queensferry crossing?
It should, for the bits of work that involve snagging, work that involves lane closures, yes, it will be. But there could be other instances where there actually be required for lane closures.
Accidents, I accept that.
Yeah, but in relation to the work that is associated with the snagging, yes, it would be. Once the snagging is completed, we need to do so.
Thank you. The next question is from Peter Chapman. Peter.
Thank you, Convener. We're on to the AWPR now, Cabinet Secretary, and delighted to see that the road's up and running and working well. Notwithstanding the fact that we can't get tractors on it, but nevertheless. Anyway, it's a fixed price contract, but there is a dispute of hundreds of millions of pounds between Transport Scotland and the contractors. I just ask, has progress been made in resolving the claim by the AWPR contractors against Transport Scotland? And if so, when might it finally be resolved?
You answer that, I'm sure, because Mr. Chapman has mentioned tractors. He wants to declare that he's a farmer before you answer that question. Do you want to declare that?
I really need to declare that.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary.
Okay. Convener, that's well mentioned. Thank you.
So on the point of tractors, I think the member knows my response to the issue of tractors on AWPR. So, and it remains the same from the previous points when you've raised this, the previous occasions when you've raised this matter with me. In relation to the contract, the committee is aware that the contractors lodged a substantial claim. There's a process for that to go through. That process remains live. What I can say is it stands at the present moment, the contractors have not been able to substantiate sufficient evidence to support their claim, and it remains with them to submit and provide the evidence to support any justification for the claim which they're making.
Have you any idea when this might be resolved? I mean, is there any kind of timescale to get this resolved? And on that issue, I believe it's been reported recently that there's something like £800,000 worth of legal costs being involved in trying to solve this dispute. Is that a correct figure? And you know, is that likely to balloon further before we can get a resolution of this issue?
I'm not sure where the £800,000 figure comes from. If you want to provide it to me, I'm more than happy to get it checked and clarified for them. You asked me in terms of time frame. The onus is with the contractors to substantiate their claim. As it stands, the contract price remains as it is at the present time. I stated previously, I'm not prepared for the taxpayers to pay over the price for mistakes or failings on the part of contractors. And that remains the case. So the onus is very much with them on substantiating any claim which they're making and to provide the necessary evidence to support that.
Thank you. Maureen, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Convener. The the AWPR junction with the A93, the Deeside corridor, you're well aware of that, Cabinet Secretary, having visited that part of the AWPR. A number of properties were purchased for the construction. Residents nearby have written to me because they are currently some of them are being vandalised. I wonder how quickly Transport Scotland can dispose of these properties either to private individuals or whatever, so that the vandalism can stop. I realise the properties have been made more secure, but it is a concern of my constituents.
I'm not aware of the specific detail, but I can ask Michelle Rennie to comment on the process for looking at disposal of the properties, if that's helpful.
Yeah, so as you're aware, we've bought a number of properties in order to be able to construct the scheme. We hand that land over to the contractor to allow him to undertake the construction, gain the necessary accesses and what have you. At the end of the construction period, the contractor factoring in, because this is an NPD project and the NPD company will be responsible for the operation and maintenance of the project for 30 years. They factor in what their operation and maintenance requirements will be, and then they determine what land is surplus to their requirements. And that land is then made available for sale.
So at what time when will they know whether they still require to have them or that they can dispose of them?
We'd hope to get confirmation on that in the next few months, and we will make it available for sale at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Unless there's any more questions on that, we're going to move on to the next topic, and the Deputy Convener's leading on this one as well. Maureen.
Peter. Okay. If we move on to the A9 and A96, before I start on particulars, Cabinet Secretary, can I just confirm that it is still absolutely Scottish Government's intention that all our cities will be joined by dual carriageways?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just ask that because some people say that because they now have spanking new roads that it shouldn't go any further, and the congestion on the A96 between Aberdeen and Inverness is really quite substantial at some times. So can I ask for a progress update both on the A9 and the A96?
Okay, on the A9, good progress is continuing to be made. We are in a position where two sections. One section has been completed. The second section is presently under construction, which is the Luncarty to Burnham. I visited a few months ago and the contractors were making good progress and expected to see it being open to traffic in spring 2021. Dependent upon, again, for any projects of this nature, depends on the weather this winter and the contractor being able to get the works which are necessary completed during that time. We have now got some 95% of the dualling programme, the statutory process of the dualling programme underway, with the preferred options for the remaining section at the Pass of Burnham to Tay Crossing expected to be announced later this year. And also through the negotiation process we've had within a number of the local areas, we've been able to avoid going to public local inquiries in 4 different parts of the route through the process of being able to try to address issues at locus as much as we can, which is welcome. We're also in discussion with key stakeholders within the construction industry as well about the future phases of the programme for the dualling of the A9. So that continues to make good progress, and we will continue to take that forward in the way in which we have. In relation to the A96 dualling programme, on Inverness to Nairn, including the Nairn bypass section, that was considered by a public local inquiry reporter. They're considering the representations which have been made to them and are preparing a report which will then be submitted to ministers for our determination. We're expecting that fairly soon to be completed. We're also making good progress in the section between Hardmuir and Fochabers with the development and the assessment of the preferred route options, which is well underway. And the route option assessment work is also underway on the sections between the east of Huntly and in Aberdeen. Now, a key part with any major infrastructure project is public engagement, and it would be fair to say that there has been a very effective and very robust public engagement programme in taking forward some of the work around the A96. The level of engagement from local communities along the length of the route has been very high. So far, we've had over 16,500 people attend events that we've hosted to date, which I think is also a reflection of the importance that the project has to the communities along this particular route. And we've had approximately 800 consultation responses which were received to our May route options engagement event on the Huntly to Aberdeen section. And it's important from my perspective that we reflect on the very considerable level of feedback which we have had. We're taking forward that just now to collate that information. But due to the high feedback which we've had during the course of this consultation, Transport Scotland will now undertake work around identifying preferred options as soon as possible, but it may be into next year, just given the volume of responses which we've received.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for that comprehensive response. And in terms of completion dates for both routes, when are we looking at?
We're still working in the original time frame, which was set out. But as with any major infrastructure project, there is always challenges around completing them on the original time frames. But we're continuing to work to the original time frames at the present moment.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to bring Peter in and then John Finney. Peter.
Thanks. As regards the A96 planning, you say there's been lots of consultation, and I accept there has been, but there is real concern about the planning of this project around Inverurie. And you're well aware that there's a big push locally by the local people that think that the best option around Inverurie is to dual the existing road. And I know that's been ruled out, but the feeling is it's the best option, it's the cheapest option, it's the most environmentally friendly option, and it's the quickest option to be built. How do you respond to the fact that this is generally the feeling of the local population?
Well, what I'm always very conscious of is that when it comes to identifying preferred routes, there will be competing demands and there will be differences of opinion as to what that route should actually be. So, for example, if it was an online upgrade through Inverurie, I suspect those householders who would be adversely affected by it would have a different opinion to others in the town who may think that actually that would be my preferred option as well. So there is always a balancing that needs to be struck with these matters. But I am conscious of the very considerable level of feedback that we have received during the consultation exercise, and I'm grateful for the members' comments and that there has been an extensive public engagement. I'm also very conscious that the community will have to live with a major road for many, many decades to come. And I want to make sure that we get this right and that we listen to what communities have got to say as much as we can before coming to a finalised decision, which is why, given the very significant level of feedback that we have received, that it will probably take us a bit longer to take forward some of the further work around the preferred route option. But that could have an impact in timeframes in taking the work forward, which, going back to Maureen Watt's point about what is the time frame for it being completed, is that if we take more time to engage with the community and to listen to these issues, it could have an impact on the completion time frame. So a balance has to be struck with these matters. But I am very conscious of making sure that, given the nature of this road building programme, that we do take the necessary time to ensure that we are listening to all of the views within the communities that are affected by it, in order to try and address them as best we can. And if that means it takes a bit longer, then it may take a bit longer. But I would prefer to take that extra time to do that, rather than not give people the time and opportunity to make their comments known.
Can I just say that I absolutely welcome that response, and I agree with his position on it.
Thank you. John Finney. Let's see if we can continue this agreement.
You know the answer to that. Thank you very much, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, Scottish Greens were very pleased when the Scottish Government announced their climate emergency a couple of months ago, a few months later than they should have declared it. But we were given an assurance that all policies would be subject to review in light of the declaration of the climate emergency. Could you outline to the committee here the review that's taken place of these two major projects in light of the climate emergency, please?
Well, most of the review work that's been undertaken is in relation to future programmes. So,
Cabinet Secretary, no, everything was subject to review.
So, yeah. So, yeah, it's been reviewed on the basis of what measures we can take forward. But we are not in a position where we are cancelling the drilling of the A9 or cancelling the drilling of the A96 programme. What we are doing, though, is through our wider, so for example within the National Transport Strategy, through the STPR2 process, is that the lens which will be used for going forward will be one which is very much minded by the climate emergency which we face. And some of the consequences of that process has already been demonstrated in what's in the programme for government, so the bus privatisation, the low carbon initiatives we're taking in aviation as well, also within the rail sector, are all reflections of applying that lens to transport policy. But going forward for STPR2 and also for the National Transport Strategy, it will be very much through the lens of the climate change emergency, and that will shape the priorities which we set out as part of the STPR2 process.
John, I think you've got another question. The comment I would make, I'm very happy to let you in, but I'm going to then come to Emma, because Emma had indicated she wanted to talk on the climate emergency, and I'd hate to think you'd trampled on her question. So please ask the question, then we'll come to Emma.
Do beg your pardon, yeah. Well, it would seem that there are options. You answered the Deputy Convener that you've no intention of stopping the projects, and I understand that you enjoy the support of 3 of the opposition parties in respect of that. There's other opportunities to slow the project or to modify it. So, for instance, on the A96, rather than expensive junctions, to have the roundabouts as are there at the moment. But we're told, or I was told previously, you want the Rolls-Royce model. Is there a possibility that you could have less expenditure by having roundabouts rather than grade separated junctions, as is existing in the dual carriageway at the Aberdeen end at the moment?
I'll ask Michelle Rennie maybe just from a technical point of view around grade separation going to roundabouts and the cost savings which are associated with it. But we're also moving into, with STPR2 process, we also have the National Infrastructure Commission which is taking place at the present time. The draft National Transport Strategy, and next year we'll also have the capital spending review as well, which again will all be reflective of our climate change emergency. So what I want to assure the member of is that in transport expenditure, climate change is a key factor that we take into account. Now, what I don't accept though is that there are some who would say that effectively we should quite literally stop building roads. I'm not suggesting that you're suggesting that, but there are some who would say just stop building roads and just put it all into other green alternatives. The reality is that we will always need good road connectivity in the country because it's important to the economy and it's important to local and regional economies as well. So we will continue to have road programmes, but we have to look at a range of other measures that we can take in order to address the issues around climate change. And that includes modal shift, helping to support people to move into public transport, having the hierarchy in terms of transport, so from walking, cycling, wheeling to public transport, all of the measures that we need to put in place in order to try and help to reduce car use as well. So there's a whole plethora of measures that we need to take forward to try and address this agenda, and I can give the member an absolute assurance of our commitment to doing that, but that will also involve investment into road infrastructure as well.
Okay, I'm going to bring it in, Emma, if there's another question there. He seems to have had quite enough.
We want a technical explanation around grade separation junctions to that of roundabouts.
As interesting as that may seem, I'm sure if Michelle would like to write to the committee, we can pass it on to Mr. Finney. I am concerned about time, And Emma, if there is a question on climate emergency or climate matters, please
I will be very brief, actually. I mean, we're talking about, roads that are already planned, and then I know I have issues personally in the south of Scotland with A75, 76 and 77. We've debated it in Chamber numerous times. But I'm assuming that the climate change emergency won't stop progress of bypassing some of the villages in the A77, because I'm assuming if we can get lorries faster on the roads passing villages, they can have a shorter drive time, so less diesel emissions. Would that be a consideration for continuing to look at improvements on the A77, such as the Maybole bypass, as well as, if we've got a climate change emergency, I'm sure the people east-west, for Stranraer to Dumfries, would be very unhappy if certain improvements in the road wasn't continued to be considered. So I'd appreciate some feedback about that.
I think it's important we don't play it off as being one or the other. So we either just take forward what people would see as being non-road building programmes by cancelling all road building programmes and put them into other green type initiatives. It's a combination of trying to do them both, and that's the approach which we're trying to take. So our intention is to continue to invest in our road infrastructure where it's necessary, and I'm very conscious of the regular lobbying I received from Emma Harper around the A77 and the A75 and the wider transport infrastructure within the southwest of Scotland. But we need to make sure that the decisions which we make as part of the STPR2 process, that it is through the lens of the climate change emergency, and that will be reflected in the priorities which we set out as part of that process. So it's not one or the other, but it's making sure that we have a balanced approach to help us to meet our climate change, our very ambitious climate change targets, to reduce carbon emissions from transport as well, which is one of the biggest contributors, while at the same time making the right type of infrastructure investment that's necessary in order to support our economy and to support local and regional communities.
And I'm sure the climate emergency has impacted what the National Infrastructure Commission are thinking about, or the mission for, connecting everybody better, especially in the south part of my region, or the south of Scotland region.
I don't want to second guess what the Infrastructure Commission come up with, because they're independent of government. However, from the discussions I've had with its chair, Ian Russell, he is very mindful of the declaration of a climate emergency, and I would expect that to be reflected in their final report.
Thank you, Emma. Stuart, I think the next question is yours. I am conscious that I don't think we're going to get through all the questions, but we'll go for as long as that we can get within a reasonable time frame. So, Stuart.
Yes, I want to turn to the National Transport Strategy and the related strategic transport projects. Some of the things I might have asked Convener, I think we have covered, so we may be able to chop it down a wee bit. I will just in passing say the STPR will be remiss if it doesn't include a roundabout at the toll of Burness, and perhaps contemplation of a wee bit of dual carriageway up towards it, but that's for another day. The key thing I want to try and focus on is how we manage demand, in particular for car traffic, which is one of the major contributors to climate difficulties that we're experiencing. The previous committee, and I think I was sitting in the ministerial chair answering for the government at the stage in session 3 on transport and land use, focused on the difficulty in getting the hierarchy that you've referred to, Cabinet Secretary, into planning at local authority and government, and in particular incentivising people to use public transport, a positive action, and discouraging people from using their car, perhaps a negative one. How are you going to strike that balance going forward and make it more attractive to make more climate-friendly options, the choice?
It's not an easy balance to strike, but it's a good challenge for us to take on and to address. So, for example, the announcement we made last week on bus prioritisation is a very practical example of looking at how we can make bus travel more attractive to commuters by giving greater certainty to journey times through bus prioritisation. So by the reallocating of existing road space around the motorway network in Glasgow for high volume passenger vehicles, again allows us to demonstrate that that's a priority area and it can give greater certainty, greater provision of bus lanes and also potentially rapid transit routes, all of which then make it more attractive for the travelling public to make that modal shift onto public transport. Alongside that, the measures which we are providing for within the Transport Bill, so for example the introduction of low emission zones in terms of encouraging people if they're coming into the town centre to either have a low emission vehicle but preferably to make use of public transport to come into town centres where that's possible, is about incentivising people and encouraging people to make that option. The provisions we have within the bill as well around smart and integrated ticketing is to try and help to provide arrangements where people can actually purchase a ticket. They can take them through different modes on a journey when they are travelling by public transport. And the measures which we have set out in the draft National Transport Strategy, the hierarchy of transport options that we've provided, the walking, wheeling, cycling and shared transport options are all the preferred options that we want to encourage. So there is a range of measures that we can take to try and encourage people to make greater use of public transport, while at the same time also putting in some measures that help to encourage behaviour shift as well, such as LEZs, workplace parking levies, of course, and also introducing measures such as smart and integrated ticketing that make joined-up travel between different modes easier for the travelling public.
Well, given that there's many modes delivered by many different bodies, government, local authority, and indeed private operators as well, one of the things the National Transport Strategy is focusing on is governance, which I presume relates to the coordination of these. Can you tell us a bit more how that's going to work, what it might look like, and why, in particular, perhaps private operators would wish to sign up to that at all?
Well, it's more to do with the regional transport partners. What we have, we carried out a piece of work to assess thinking and views around the existing regional transport planning arrangements we have in place. What came from that engagement process, which was undertaken in a very collaborative fashion with their colleagues at a regional level, was that there was an acceptance that there is a case for changing the existing structures. What we haven't come to a view on is what those future structures should be. So within the draft National Transport Strategy, we've set out a commitment to taking that forward with regional partners on what should the future shape of regional transport planning be within Scotland. How does that fit in with wider planning matters within regions and local areas? How does it fit in with wider local strategies and a whole range of different areas, so we can try to make it a much more integrated approach? So we haven't come up with a specific model. We've accepted and agreed with other stakeholders there is a case for change. What we will now do, once we have finalised the National Transport Strategy, is start the formal process of that engagement to shape what the future regional planning arrangement should be. So it's about trying to get a model that works. So the model that will work in Highland won't necessarily be the model that would work in Falkirk. So we aren't coming into this with a preconceived view on what it should be, but we want it to be more effective, and we also want to look at how it engages beyond just that of transport as well.
I'm looking for a very brief answer to this. You're looking at RTP reorganisations, perhaps. The East Coast, we've got Sestrans, Edinburgh-based, Edinburgh-centred. We've got the Tay RTP centred in Dundee, Nestrans in Aberdeen. How are you going to reconcile the quite different requirements there are to make transport work effectively in urban areas versus rural areas? Are you going to ensure that any new structure that's brought forward, speaking for my part, properly and adequately reflects the needs of rural areas, where often there is a very limited range of choice available to travellers.
Yeah, and it will be a challenge in trying to find a model that is effective in each part of the country. The likelihood is any change in structure will probably require primary legislation, so the committee would have an opportunity to scrutinise that. But what I want to emphasise to you is that we are not entering into this discussion with a preconceived view on what we think the future structure should be. We want to work very closely with partners at a regional level in order to identify what that structure should be and to make sure that they are able to shape it and that it reflects local needs and local circumstances. So I don't have a fixed view on what it should be, but I'm certainly keen to make sure we get it right for every part of the country.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The next question is from Mike. Mike.
Thank you, Convener. I want to focus on cycling and the Cycling Action Plan. The vision was that 10% of everyday journeys be made by bike by next year, and I know the Cabinet Secretary indicated in the Chamber just before the recess on the 18th of June that progress to the overall figure has been slow and unlikely to be met by next year. But of course, it's not unlikely to be met, it's just not going to be met. We understand that. But I want to focus my question on a practical measure which we've already agreed to in Parliament to try and up the level of cycle use in Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary voted for my amendment when I put it forward in Parliament. We all voted for it because it was unanimous. But there's no point in passing unanimous resolutions in Parliament if we don't take action to implement it. And this is focused about ensuring that every school child has access to cycle training. And when I raised this before, you said, well, you know, the schools have got this if they wish to take it up. But that's not what the motion said, that we all agreed to. The motion said that every child should have access to if they want it. So really, I would like the Cabinet Secretary to perhaps go away and speak to his officials and tell us at a future date whether he could come back to this committee and tell us what action he's going to do to actually implement what we've already agreed is a good thing.
So there are two important aspects, in my view, in helping to encourage people to take up cycling. One is the right type of infrastructure, and the second is behavioural change and supporting behavioural change. And the type of training which you made reference to is part of the behavioural change element of it. As you'll be aware, we've asked Cycle Scotland to undertake a review of the action plan, which they're presently doing, and I'm more than happy to make sure the very point that the members made is considered as part of that review process and to assess how we can increase the number of young people who are getting access to cycle training.
It would be a good opportunity for the Cabinet Minister to come forward at the appropriate point and tell us all the good news.
More than happy to consider it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, there are a series of questions and people have indicated they want to ask. I'm going to move actually on to the question by Angus and then come to John Finney. So, Angus.
Okay, thanks. Convener, I'll keep this brief, given that the Cabinet Secretary's already touched on the £500 million to support bus priority measures. However, for clarity and for the record, can the Cabinet Secretary provide any more information on the £500 million to support the bus priority measures? For example, over what period are these funds spread over, what areas will benefit, and what type of infrastructure will these funds support?
So, Convener, the announcement made last week is to form what is the Bus Partnership Fund with local authorities to allow them to put bus prioritisation in place. It's over £500 million. The intention is that it's long-term funding over the next 5-6 years for them to take forward these types of projects. I'm conscious that for many of the local authorities, they will not have projects to hand that they can just suddenly say, right, we've got a £50 million bus prioritisation programme we would like to execute next year. So there will be a lead-in time for some of these projects to start to be delivered. But the intention is that will allow, as of next year, we'll be in a position where local authorities in the bus industry will be able to start looking at how they can design some of these projects and take them forward. What we'll also have next year as part of the capital spending review which will be issued, we'll be able to set out the details on how it will be rolled forward over the coming years as part of the capital spending review. So I would see this being a programme over the next 5 to 7 years for local authorities and their partners to take forward, but it will probably take them, I would expect, possibly up to 18 months to get projects and ideas together to be developed before funding starts to be put in place for them to actually deliver on these projects. What we are keen to do is to make sure that they are taken forward in a fashion which there is very clear evidence to demonstrate that they will deliver a modal shift, an improvement in use of bus. So there will be a very strict criteria and a very rigid way in which, well, not rigid, a very detailed way in which we'll look at any proposals that come in from local authorities and taking it forward. And the purpose behind this is to help to support a big shift towards the use of the bus, and to see that as being part of the strategy we can put in place to get the modal shift to meet the climate change challenges which Mr Finney and Ms Harper have been raising with me. Okay. Thank you.
There's a few supplementaries to that. Richard Lyle, followed by Colin Smith.
Cabinet Secretary, for clarity, basically if there are areas where buses have went down or not been provided, can the Council approach you for access to these funds?
When you mean services in an area which a bus service is designed no longer to provide? Yeah,
well, buses, unfortunately, there are some companies who have stopped doing particular routes or particular areas, and that's a continual complaint to us. Is this something that Council can access, or a bus company can access?
No, this is capital funding for bus privatisation. So this is for providing rapid transit corridors, for providing bus lanes, for bus privatisation. So it could be new traffic light systems, etc., for bus privatisation, for creating segregated road space for buses. So that's what this funding is for. So of course, we also put in the other funding of £250 million a year to support bus through the National Concessionary Travel Scheme, the BSOG scheme, which we have as well, to support the industry. But this is specifically capital for creating these types of projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Colin.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think the infrastructure fund, I think, is very welcome, but it will mainly be focused on cities, for example, bus lanes, to tackle the issue of congestion in our main cities, and that's less of a challenge in some of our more rural areas. So I'm keen to know how this fund will actually benefit rural communities, and do you accept, Cabinet Secretary, that the biggest challenge in maintaining the bus network in some of these rural communities is not as much capital infrastructure, it's revenue funding, it's the actual cost of the service themselves. They're very, very precarious, and there won't be bus lanes in the sort of small towns and communities in the south of Scotland, but that bus network is in a state of collapse in some areas, and the actual daily cost of running the buses is the challenge that they have, and the infrastructure fund itself won't cover that. So I'm keen to know what funding will be available to try to maintain and improve that network. And does the fund, for example, cover the cost of buses itself, or is it purely the physical infrastructure of bus lanes?
So obviously, in terms of buses, we have the Green Bus Fund, and also in the programme for government we set out our intention to look at how the new National Investment Bank could also provide support to the bus industry for the procuring of new buses in itself, and we'll be working with the sector to look at how that can be scoped out and shaped to help to support them. In relation to the very specific point, though, that Colin makes, which I think is one which I'm very conscious of as well, is it's revenue funding that's a challenge in many of the rural areas, and major bus infrastructure in places like Glasgow and Edinburgh will not necessarily help to support, or will not necessarily have that direct benefit to these rural areas. What's also very clear to me, though, is in my engagement with the bus industry, is that given the patronage decline which they are facing, the way in which services have become increasingly financially difficult to manage, is that those which they see as being more marginal services are very often the ones that they end up cutting back on in order to meet the financial challenges which they are facing. So part of the purpose with the bus infrastructure investment is in order to drive up bus patronage and for the bus to be seen as being a much more important form of public transport that can be utilised. That in itself should generate greater scope for the industry to look at how it makes its wider investment. So what I've said to the bus industry and the bus sector is that in government setting out a very ambitious financial investment into bus infrastructure, I also expect the bus industry to step up and to recognise that they've got a contribution to make in improving bus services overall. And if services are more financially sustainable across a broader area, then from their perspective, there's scope to actually maintain and sustain services in areas where it is more challenging. To them, it becomes more realistic. So it's not a direct answer to your point, but the point is that there's an issue about financial sustainability across the sector, and very often rural communities are the first to be impacted by that when services are cut. If we can make the industry much more financially sustainable by making it a much more attractive mode of transport through the infrastructure investment, then it takes off some of that potential financial pressure.
Okay, Emma, can I just say, I think people may have forgotten after the summer break, it's quite good to keep an eye on me just to see whether the answers and the questions are nice and short and whether to get another one in. There are still some questions to go. And Emma, and then I've got John Finney.
Thanks. Thank you, Convener. It is just a quick question. I know we've been here for more than 2 hours. We talk about incentivising people to use buses and trains, for instance, and journey times is something that is an incentive to get folk onto bus or rail. And last week, Alec Hines said that we might need to look at electrifying the journey, the train from Stranraer to Ayr or Dumfries to Glasgow in order to tackle climate change. So part of the incentivising of people is journey times. Is that something the government would support when we're trying to look at decarbonising as well?
Oh, absolutely. So, part of the purpose behind the bus infrastructure investment is that the average speed, I'm told, by the bus industry of a bus going through Glasgow city centre is 3 miles per hour because of congestion, which means that journey times are longer and that then it acts as a disincentive for people to decide to use the bus. It just takes too long and it's too unreliable. So by having bus infrastructure in place, priority bus infrastructure in place, it allows us to speed up that journey time, gives you greater certainty and makes it a much more attractive mode of transport for people to make use of. In relation to rail and further electrification, we still have an electrification programme being taken forward here in Scotland. The assessment that we're undertaking at present time is around the East Kilbride line for potential electrification. However, in decarbonising our rail network, we are making very good progress. So something in the region of between 70 to 75% of all passenger journeys made on a daily basis in Scotland now are on electrified routes. But there are some very significant routes we still have, long distance routes that we still have that are not electrified. Technology is changing though. I'm conscious that we are moving into an age where we are seeing the development of electric battery trains and also hydrogen trains, which remove the need for you to electrify the line. And that's an area of technology which we are keen to look at being introduced into the network here in Scotland. And we're engaged in discussions around how we can look at doing that. So electrification is still an option in some routes, but there will be other routes where it may actually be more appropriate for us to look at battery technology or hydrogen technology, and we want to look at how that can be utilised within the network here in Scotland.
Okay, thanks.
I'm going to bring in John Finney now with the last lot of questions. John.
Thank you. I'll maybe jump about a wee bit here because I think it's a follow-on question to that Emma Harper's asked there. And it is about, decarbonising the rail transport network, of course, is good. It's very positive. But given it produces 1% of Scotland's greenhouse gas emissions, what calculations does the government do around the benefit of that when configured alongside the high costs of electrification?
Well, it goes back to the point I was making to Emma Harper here, is that electrification is very expensive, so it costs roughly something like £1 million per kilometre to electrify a railway line. So it's an expensive option to pursue. However, new technology, I think, can play an important part in decarbonising it. And I recognise that it's not a major contributor to climate change, but nevertheless, if you stay next to a railway line or a railway station and there's HSTs going through it or there's diesel trains going through it, I'm pretty sure you would say, well, in terms of air quality, I would like to see that, that removed if possible. So may not be in terms of the global contribution it makes to our overall carbon levels within the transport sector high, but nevertheless I think it's still important for us to look at. And my view is that there are routes where it would be more likely we'll be looking at hydrogen and battery as opposed to electrification as a rolling stock that we would use in those lines.
One brief supplementary in a previous, and then the final question, if I may.
It sounds like you're pushing the envelope, Mr. Finney.
Yeah,
Yes, go for it.
Thank you very much indeed. Cabinet Secretary, I'm not going to repeat the headline figure. I'm sure the Scottish Government would love me to repeat the headline figure connected with the bus priority measures, but more
Feel free.
Sorry?
Feel free.
The more information you can provide in that, the better, and particularly the policy development of it. I would like to see, for instance, what regard in the policy development there was to rural communities, but particularly perhaps you could aid the committee by providing the committee with the island's impact assessment you've done in respect of that proposal, please.
I'm more than happy to, as we work it forward with our colleagues in local authorities, to keep the committee up to date on that being taken forward. As well, the reality is that the vast majority of the bus partnership funding, the capital investment, is likely to be in urban areas, but there will be wider benefits that come from that. And it's clear from the engagement I've had with the bus industry is that they can see how that will deliver wider benefits within the network, that they and making them more sustainable going forwards. But I'm more than happy to keep the committee up to date as we roll this forward with our colleagues in local government.
I'm sure the committee is grateful for that. It was a very specific proposal because, of course, it was this committee that did the Islands Bill, and of course, an Islands Impact Assessment is supposed to accompany any proposal. So, albeit I acknowledge it's likely to say it's have little impact in the islands, if you could provide the Islands Impact Assessment associated with that proposal, that would be very helpful, Cabinet Secretary.
More than happy to provide what information we can.
Thank you very much indeed. I have a final question, if I may.
Final question, Mr. Finney.
Convener, and it is about something that's mentioned in the programme for government, Cabinet Secretary. It's about the decarbonising of aviation in the Highlands and Islands region. What proportion of Scotland's aviation-related greenhouse gas emissions are produced in the Highlands and Islands area, and what impact will that proposal have on Scotland's total emissions from the aviation sector?
Well, the figures are not broken down in that regional basis, so I can't give you a figure as to exactly what the contribution is from internal aviation in Scotland and what it contributes to our overall carbon output. We don't have data to that level.
With the greatest respect, that makes no sense whatsoever. You have a proposal, but you don't know what the implications of that proposal would be.
No. The point is that what I'm saying to you is that the data is not broken down to that. There is no doubt it makes a contribution to whatsoever. Aviation makes a contribution to our carbon output overall. This is a specific measure about decarbonising our internal flight network in Scotland, which is around the development of hybrid and battery technology within the aviation sector, decarbonising our landside operations as well within HIL. But the actual figures in terms of aviation's contribution to our overall carbon output is not broken down into that regional level, to that granular level.
I'm trying to understand, Cabinet Secretary, how at future meetings this committee will gauge the success or otherwise of this ambitious proposal. What's our starting point?
Well, if you look at it at the present time, all of the aircraft which are used in internal air flights within Scotland are aviation fuel based. If we can get to the point where we start off with our, say for example, short internal flights within inter-island flights, which are battery or hybrid operated planes, then it reduces the carbon output that comes from those particular types of aircraft. If we then decarbonise the landside operations in these particular airports as well, then it reduces the carbon output that is contributed by them. As the technology develops, then you expand that into looking at, so for example, you then get into potentially your Glasgow Sombra routes, or further afield within the internal network as the technology develops. What we want to do with this is that it's about our, not just about reducing our contribution through aviation, it's also about capitalising on the new technology which has been developed. So part of the work, so during the summer I was at Cranfield University, just outside London, looking at the way in which the industry is developing around new technology and aviation. And there's a real opportunity for us to be leaders in this technology. So it's also about trying to capitalise on the economic benefits that come from the development of this new technology. Okay. And the work that's been undertaken in Orkney at the present time, or will be undertaken in Orkney, gives us the chance to be able to do that as well. So reduce our carbon output, but also get the economic benefits from being at the forefront of the new technology that's been developed within the aviation sector.
Cabinet Secretary, I think, to save labelling this point, I think it would be very helpful if you could ask your officials to look at the figures of the carbon output in the Highlands from airports and compare it to the rest of Scotland and give us a figure that we can then base future assumptions on to see whether you've reached your target, because it is you, Cabinet Secretary, and your government that set the target. And I think it's right the committee have the opportunity to look at it. So we look forward to receiving that in writing. And that therefore brings us to the end of the committee. Before I conclude the committee, I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here this morning. It has been quite a long session, and I'd also like to ask the committee just to remain behind for a quick informal discussion subject to this meeting, which we will do in private. And so I'd ask the witnesses and the Cabinet Secretary and the Minister to leave as promptly as possible to allow us to do that. And I therefore conclude this meeting. Thank you.